are lots of portraits of Kate O'Brien in existence, but to my knowledge, this is about the only one that could be described as a self-portrait. She talks so much about herself in ways that we are very familiar with and gives us some of the details of her life, but very little beyond that helps us to understand what was in the mind of this wonderful writer, one of the most probably neglected 20th century Irish writers. There's a lot I recognise in her as a convent girl from Limerick myself, and yet at the end of it I have this overwhelming sense of wanting to know more and really wanting a good biography of her. And I love the film noir quality, which gives us that grainy look and gives us the wonderful cigarette smoke rising from her hand in the glass, which is probably half empty, half full, with a very good whiskey.
It seems rather strange to me, this business of talking out loud about myself with no one able to interrupt me. It's a terrible thing to do, really. But I suppose any one of you might say that it's hardly more egotistical than to ask you to sit down and read through one whole book of mine. That's right, in a way, because writers do ask for the attention of the public. A writer is someone who throws himself or herself at the head of the public and asks to be listened to. We confront you with our conceptions of human life and our recreations and inventions from life as we see it. And if those inventions and recreations please you or interest you at all, I suppose it's rather natural for us to talk to you sometimes about how we arrive at our strange profession and what we find to be the difficulties or the satisfactions of the work we do. These are vague words and not at all like what any decent painter would call a self-portrait. An abstract is not a portrait, and I suppose what's wanted here is an attempt at some decent, straightforward representational drawing. Well, I was born in Limerick a long time ago. We were a large family. There were 9 of us altogether, 5 brothers I had and 3 sisters. And our mother died when the eldest of us was quite young, only 15, and the youngest was not yet 1. I was just over 5 when my mother died, so I only remember her in flashes. But they are very vivid flashes. She was very beautiful to me always in these memories. Very gay, she was always laughing at me. I was rather suspicious of that laughing. I was a cautious, solemn sort of child, and I was inclined to think there was a catch in it somewhere, that what was the joke Mother had about me. But I only remember her that way in flashes. I do remember that we were well off at home. Father was a wealthy man, and we were brought up in comfort and prosperity. He was a member of that bourgeoisie that had arrived in difficulty through the 19th century, through all the penal laws and penal land laws and difficulties of hedge schools and rebellions and emigrations and evictions of the 19th century. Our grandfathers had been men fighting through that period who had arrived into the cities from their lands to become prosperous bourgeois. And our paternal grandfather, the O'Brien grandfather, was one of those. Both our grandfathers were countrymen with little holdings, small farms in East Limerick, but he was evicted in the 1850s early on, I think, and came into Limerick, as I say, and made a fortune out of a great talent he had for horseflesh. And he brought up his family in prosperity and his sons to carry on his prosperous way of life. So we were brought up in a roomy red brick house on the outskirts of Limerick that grandfather had built in the 1870s. It was an ugly-looking house, big brick house with a hideous monkey puzzle tree outside, and it was rather near the dusty road. Also, it had on its main gable the crest of the arms of the O'Briens, which I thought was rather a rash flourish on grandfather's part. I never liked it, although we were supposed to be. Father told us we were the Princes of Thomond. Still, I never cared for the grandfather's fantasy on the house. But we had a bourgeois and sheltered and happy childhood, and Baru House was very comfortable to live in inside. And we were a great crowd of us, but we had lots of room, and ponies and donkeys and fun. And we had Kilkee in West Clare, a magical place, magical Kilkee, every summer for the holidays. And then, of course, there was school. I had, as it happened, a great deal of school, because father, very wisely, I think, decided to send me to boarding school before I was 6 with my sisters, rather than, as mother was dead, rather than leave me at home lonely in a nursery with little baby brothers and an old nurse. So I had 12 years in boarding school, and I was very happy. I had a happy school time. I worked very hard. I was a conscientious and rather industrious child, and I loved my lessons. And I was consistently interested in what I was doing at school. I remember that. I see myself rather clearly in that time. I was a great reader too, as many children are, but I was an omnivorous reader. Anything from the Bible down to the Trippenny Diamond Library, the boys' school stories, anything did me. And I particularly liked, as most children do, I liked to get hold of forbidden novels and stories of love. And I remember it was great to get hold of the serials in Nash's magazine of the time. I was horrified and startled by a serial by Hall Caine called The Woman Thou Gavest Me. It was a very passionate series of goings-on and very alarming. I was delighted to read it. I don't know really that I remember myself much except like that, a very industrious child, very, very fond of my lessons and very fond of reading. And I don't know that I had any particular ambition, but I went up to university after those 12 years. I went up to University College Dublin. I went up in the autumn of 1916, and I took a BA honours degree and left in 1919, second honours degree. Those were terrible years, all over the world, of course. The First World War was raging in Europe terribly, and Ireland was in great uproar upset after 1916, and in the throes of the really last final great struggle for independence. I remember the atmosphere of the times, of course, and the excitements and some of the great events. And I also remember the terrible cold of Dublin, the shock it was to me from the south, from Munster. The fearful winds tearing down Leeson Street and Stephen's Green. They were like a visitation of hell at first, my first year. I never quite got used to them. Still give me a formless, vague feeling of gale and chill when I think of those days. But I do remember this about myself then, that from having been a really industrious and hard-working schoolgirl, I became almost overnight extremely lazy, a lazy and sceptical student. And the chief thing I remember, the happiest thing about my years in college were the friends I made. I made wonderful friends. They were a brilliant lot of people up in Dublin in those years at the university. My contemporaries appeared to me to be much more advanced and intelligent and educated than I was, and they were a revelation to me and a liberal education. I remember them all, I think, quite distinctly, all my cronies, most of them, many of them very brilliant. And I see them much more clearly in that landscape back there than I see myself. But I was there all right, and enjoying the experience of being one of them. It's amazing to recall that in those tragic years, what fun we seemed to be always having, how gay we were in my memory, with the world in ruins round us, and we were supposed to be preparing ourselves somehow to face the world which appeared to be committing suicide. We must have talked about our futures, I think, and we must have talked of ambitions and things. Some of my friends I know had fixed vocations, some for the religious life, some for linguistic Gaelic studies, or to serve Ireland politically or militantly, and all of us aimed eventually at making a living in some of the learned professions, I suppose. But I don't remember any particular ambition in myself. I remember being very much, careless about what the future would be. At school, I had thought I'd like to be a doctor. But I was never even very sure about that, and there wouldn't have been enough money, I think, really, when it came to the time, because father was dead then, and we were all hard up and scattering about, looking for ways of living. But my impression is that I was rather slack about all that. Even after I got my degree, I took my time about the business of earning a living. It always seemed to me an unattractive sort of idea. And my prophetic and lazy soul told me that always, I think. But in the summer of 1920, I did leave Ireland and go to London to see if I could earn an honest penny. I had 2 sisters already there. I remember then, now that in that summer of 1920, I did begin to earn professional money as a writer, because someone sent me to Clement Shorter, the kind old editor of the Sphere, and he gave me reviewing to do, and he said I did it well, and he was very good to me, encouraged me, and gave me work to do. But my first salaried job, weekly, regular job with hours and a salary, was on the Manchester Guardian Weekly, where I went in late summer of that year to take a job as assistant translator on a page of foreign news in the Manchester Guardian Weekly. Can't imagine what I was assisting, but they were very good to me there, and I learnt a lot myself. I learnt what a fool one can be and how much one has to learn from serious jobs in the world. And I very much enjoyed my large salary. I had £5 a week, and £5 a week in Manchester in 1920, I tell you, that was riches. I was rolling. I remember I used to come down to London for weekends with my sisters and spend money, and it was great fun. I've never been as rich since. That £5 was marvellous. There's one hideous memory associated with the Manchester Guardian. All that autumn, Terence McSweeney was hunger striking in Brixton Jail. And along my corridor in the Manchester Guardian, every morning there came a little man, a horrid little man with a hideous face and hideous grin. He used to open the door of my room and yell in at me, 61 days fasting and you still think he's fasting, Miss O'Brien. 68 days fasting and you believe in that man. Oh, we used to get in a terrible state. My 2 colleagues were dreadfully upset always, and I used to burst into tears of sheer rage. But we never could stop that awful little morning joke. I'll never forget him. It was a terrible thing to be happening on the corridor of the Manchester Guardian, the noble Guardian. I also remember, too, from the Guardian days, the kindness to me of Colm O'Leary. He was a great Irish journalist whom everybody in Ireland must remember, who died only a year or so ago. He was frightfully kind to me. I was a tyro then, and he was a very distinguished journalist on the corridor. And he was very good to me then and afterwards in London, as he was good to so many of us when we were beginning to write. But when I wasn't sacked from the Manchester Guardian job, but it came to an end because they were winding up the page. They found it too expensive, that weekly page on the weekly. So I came back to London and I taught in a school in Hampstead, convent school, for about 2 terms. I didn't care for that, and I went from that rather quickly to Spain, again to teach in a house, to teach a boy and his sister English literature. He was a very brilliant boy and he wanted to be taught very well, so I had to work hard, but I liked the life very much. The most intelligent pupil, and I found that the peace and carefree routines of the life suited me well and helped me to think. And I altogether thought that there was something to be said for that life, and I got very much interested in Spain in general, reading the papers and getting to know Spain. But I used to think sometimes on our walks up those Italian hills that how Charlotte Bronte loathed the governess life and how marvellous books she wrote on that theme of it, how she hated it. Whether I disagreed with her, I would have liked it, especially in Spain. I liked that year. But I didn't stay. Personal events brought me back to London, and then for the time I was going from job to job, looking for freelance journalism, and mixing with other young writers and young actors, and just trying to get on and finding it rather difficult. And I was always boasting there, and I had begun to try to write in Spain, and then I got to be talking about as if I was writing or could write. I used to talk about the theatre a lot and the plays I'd like to write. And Veronica Turley, who was then just out of the Academy of Dramatic Art, very young, bet me that I wouldn't write a play in a month to give to her, and I did. And she took it to an agent. She paid me the £1 that she bet me. It was very decent of her. And she took it to an agent who actually read it and sent me £25 on its chances. He thought so well of it. I've never in my life before or since heard of an agent doing such a thing as that. It was marvellous. He sent this play to the repertory players who did it. They were a Sunday night society. They did it on one of their Sunday nights very well indeed. It was received with enthusiasm. And then Later it was done commercially, 2 months later. It ran through a heat wave for about 12 weeks, I think, and was, very much liked by a lot of people. It was a young, overwritten play, very tragic, very kitchen sink style, and also over-romantic, I think, in verbiage. But still, I do think it had merit. But what I chiefly remember from it was an act of grace from Sean O'Casey. He was then, it was the summer of 1926, in the very height of his first great fame in Europe. In London, he was being acclaimed as a new genius, as indeed he was. And Juno and the Paycock was rousing the excitement through the world. And I got a telegram from him the first week of my play. Well done indeed. Dublin salutes Limerick. May I come and see you? Sean O'Casey. So I was delighted, and he came to see me indeed, and often that summer he came. He was wonderful, wonderfully gay and lively and boyish, and very helpful to me and to my notions, very, very interested and generous to a Taro. While I was doing that and writing other plays, which were failures, in the sense that they never got done, or got done odd Sunday nights, I was living on freelance journalism and trying to do this and that, and I began to feel that the ideas that I was catching on to and that I was wanting to handle were not dramatic. There was something else I could do with them. So I came round slowly to the idea of turning my creative notions to the novel form. And in my late 20s, I set about my first novel, which took me a long time to write. It was called Without My Cloak, and it was very successful. It's been a great blessing and helped me all through my life since, in cheap editions and everything. And it was very, very good. People sometimes think, that writers are lazy, and they think of our enormous advantages, that we're so free. And then we are free, too. We have the advantage of being able to, all we need is pencil and paper and a bit of quiet sometimes. But it throws the effort onto you so much that it's, it depends all on your own will, and you've no one to blame but yourself then if you don't write. But I had only myself to blame anyway when I started on Without My Cloak and began from then on into the business of writing novels, which are very laborious, really hellishly difficult to write. But, of course, there are compensations. I think that going on talking about, I did this, then I did that, it's rather dull. I suppose what you really want to know is how one does things, not where and when. And I have so little to say about that, only a very few things I've observed about myself. One, that I do write very, very slowly, really extremely slowly, and that I have no use at all for schedules or plans or card indexes or any of those aids. And I never write the last chapter first. Some people say they do. I wouldn't be able to do that because when I begin my first chapter, I certainly haven't a clue to where we'll be in the last. Novels rise to me out of reflections on people rather than on seeing situations into which I might put the suitable people. My ideas go from the people first and get them into the situations. I'm always rather influenced by music, dance music, and the human singing voice help me. They move me, they give me ideas, I don't know why. I suppose it's something to do with the ordinary people dancing, somehow, something poignant about it. John Masefield said long ago in a book, Multitude and Solitude, he said, don't despise dance music. It's the music hearts break to. And as novelists, we're very fond, like breaking hearts, they're very useful props. I like dance music. And I think of all the novels that are hidden in that phrase, that idea of ordinary people trying to be happy, trying to enjoy themselves. In every book, a writer can only do the very best he can. And when one is writing a book, when I'm writing a book certainly, I'm looking inward all the time at myself and the subject involved. I'm completely engrossed, and I never think of how it's going to be, how other people are going to find it. I'm completely engrossed with working it out for myself, strictly for myself. It's only afterwards it occurs to me that would this be conceivably of any interest to anyone but me? The communication has to come. The purpose of writing is communication, but it's in the form of proof it comes to me, not something I seek first. It's a proof afterwards, if people have liked what I've written, that perhaps I succeeded in some measure in what I was trying to do. And, at the time, one time when I was writing The Anteroom, which was a book that gave me a very great deal of satisfaction to myself and which failed to please the public, failed to please everyone perhaps but me, I was just going back to Spain after a long absence, and I was reading the Spanish mystics and St. Teresa in particular. I'd always been interested in Teresa, and I don't know why at that time, early 30s, when I went back to Spain, I was reading so much of Spanish history and Teresa herself. But in Teresa's works, which came to be very important to me, I came on a character that Teresa spoke about, the Princess of Eboli, Ana de Mendoza, the one-eyed princess, very famous in the 16th century for her strange and puzzling relationship with her king, Philip II, who was a character, a very curious character that interested me. Well, these two characters and their relationship haunted me for years, and for about 15 years, while I was doing other things, I was toying with the idea of making a play of Anna, then not. And finally, in 1945, one of my later novels, I wrote a very long novel about her and Philip II, and I thought I'd got them out of my system. And I hadn't, you know. I've always been a bit bedeviled by the theatre thing. And Catherine Cornell asked me to make a play of that lady. Very, very difficult thing to do. But I went at it with a certain amount of delight and enthusiasm, made a play which we thought good, and which failed, but didn't fail, I think, as a play, but simply failed on Broadway for some reason. But it taught me an awful lot doing that, and it gave me the great friendship of Catherine Cornell and of her great husband, the director, Guthrie McClintock, who died last year. And also it gave me the friendship of Sheila Richards, who did it here in Dublin very, very beautifully indeed. She played that lady for me. So that these efforts that go wrong aren't always wrong. I mean, they give you an awful lot as a writer, and they give you a lot of experience, and they teach you your job, and they give you rich rewards that you're not always aware of until some time afterwards. But still, I made a play of The Anteroom, and that's the thing I should never have done. I did that, I suppose, for vanity and to try to revive, to try to prove that The Anteroom was good, and also Lure of Gold, which I was offered. I mean, I had the London Theatre and people of very high reputation wanting to do it. We did it and had a sickening flop. And again, of course, I had only myself to blame. And that puzzling reflection really sums up one's career as a writer. Whatever you do, good or bad, you've only yourself to blame. The phrase exasperates me because it fills me with a sense of time lost often and work undone. However, for all of that, well, always, it's true, one has only oneself to blame. And from life, from outside, I have received, I must say, as a writer, an enormous amount of help and encouragement from the right places, and great friendship from many people who've been associated with my work. The trouble is that one feels one's put so very little back into life in return for what one got out of it. But after all, what could one give back that would be noticeable for